She thought he was dead. For 4 years, she carried the guilt. But now in the middle of a rain-soaked forest, the dog she lost is staring straight into her soul. The wind swept hard through the treetops, the rain slicing sideways like needles. Sheriff Rachel Morgan froze on the edge of the trail, her boot half sunk into the mud. She blinked against the mist and the sting in her eyes. He stood there, maybe 50 feet away, tied to a splintered pine with a strip of old paracord soaked to the bone. His coat was filthy, his ribs showing beneath the fur, and his right hind leg trembled under his weight. One of his eyes was cloudy with age or injury, but the other, amber sharp, was locked on hers. She knew that scar, a pale white gash arcing just above his left brow. "Diesel," she whispered. He didn't bark, didn't move. Just watched her rein dripping from his muzzled chest, heaving with slow labored breaths. Rachel's heart collapsed into her boots. 4 years. 4 damn years she'd told herself he was gone. Swallowed the silence. Buried the guilt. She'd seen the Avalanche swallow half her team, watched the snow bury the world, and screamed his name until her voice broke. They called off the search. She never did. The patrol that day had started like any other quiet fog, slippery gravel, a half-drunk gas station coffee steaming in her cup holder. A hiker reported possible illegal snares off North Ridge. Nothing new in these woods. Poachers came and went like the seasons. She didn't expect a ghost to be waiting at the end of the trail. Rachel knelt slowly, her sidearm pressing into her thigh. "Hey, boy," she said barely above the wind. "It's okay." He tilted his head, one ear twitching. Then just slightly, his tail moved. She opened her arms. "Come here." Diesel stepped forward, limping, wet, ribs visible beneath his fur, and he pressed his face into her chest like nothing had changed, like the storm, the snow, the silence had never taken him away. Rachel dropped her forehead to the top of his skull and closed her eyes. "You found me," she whispered. "You actually found me." She got him into the cruiser wrapped in a wool blanket from the trunk. The second she shut the door, he curled on the back seat like he remembered how. Her wipers squeaked across the windshield as she pulled away from the trailhead, heart still pounding. Back in town, Cedar Falls rolled on like nothing had happened. Mike's diner glowed in the gloom. The gas station sign flickered weakly. A couple of kids biked through puddles like it was any other Thursday. Rachel parked behind the sheriff's department and carried Diesel inside, setting him down gently on a folded towel beside her desk. He didn't bark, didn't whimper. He just lay there, watching the door, waiting. Just like old times. She sat in her office with the lights low, staring at him. The faded brass plaque on her desk still read, "Sheriff R. Morgan," but suddenly it felt like someone else's title. The last time she saw Diesel, they were on a mountainside in Colorado. The weather had turned fast. Their team was searching for 2 missing hikers. Diesel had been tracking scent through 3 feet of snow. And then the avalanche came swift, brutal, and loud as the end of the world. Half the team disappeared in white. She never found them, and Diesel never came back. Until now. The front door creaked open. Deputy Frank Alton, stocky and slow-moving in his 50s, stepped inside with rain still dripping from his jacket. He froze when he saw the dog. "Is that?" Rachel nodded. "Yeah, it's him." Frank knelt down with a groan. Diesel sniffed his outstretched hand, then rested his head again. "I'll be damned," Frank muttered. Thought he was buried under 20 feet of snow. So did I. They sat in silence, just watching the dog breathe, the steady rhythm of it. Real, present, impossible. Frank finally broke the stillness with a folder. "Got something," he said, dropping it on her desk. "Hikers found snares up near Brush Creek. Old barbed wire. Crude but tight enough to snap a deer's leg. Just like that string we had in '09. Rachel flipped through the photos. They weren't just amateur traps, they were placed close to a marked trail. Bold, sloppy. Could be just dumb kids, Frank offered. Could be something worse. Rachel leaned back, arms crossed. Diesel shifted under the desk, ears twitching. "I'll check it in the morning," she said. "You want backup?" She shook her head. "I'll take Diesel." Frank raised a brow. "That dog's retired." Rachel looked down at the old shepherd. "You really think he ever clocked out?" If stories like this restore your faith in second chances, if you believe loyalty never truly dies, subscribe now to Heroes for Animals, where we honor those who never stop protecting, even when the world forgets them. Later that evening, the station was quiet. Files stacked high on her desk. Diesel dozed beside her chair. Still breathing, steady ears, occasionally flicking toward the hallway. Rachel hadn't turned in her patrol vest. She hadn't told anyone about seeing him, not yet. What would she even say? I found a dead dog in the rain, and he remembered my name. Her fingers grazed the scar on Diesel's brow. It was real. It was him. Something stirred outside a creek, maybe the wind. But Diesel sat up slow but alert, his eye fixed on the door. Then he growled. Deep, guttural. Rachel stood hand on her holster. Stay, she whispered. She moved through the hallway, boots soft on the rubber matting. She reached the back room record storage and noticed the lock was hanging loose. She'd locked it earlier. Quietly, she opened the door. Inside movement. A figure lunged from behind a shelf. She ducked, turned, and tackled him into the wall in one smooth motion. The man scrambled. Diesel was already there, jaws snapping, cornering the intruder in seconds. Rachel cuffed him. Frank arrived seconds later. They searched his pack wire cutters, bolt fasteners, a crudely drawn trail map with red X's. Diesel stood in the doorway, calm again. Guarding. Rachel stared at the old dog and felt the strange sensation of something settling inside her. She wasn't alone anymore. That night, as the rain turned to mist and the world slowed, Rachel sat at her desk. Diesel lay curled on a fleece blanket beneath her feet. His breathing soothed something she hadn't realized was still broken. She took out her old field journal and flipped to a blank page. On the top line she wrote, "Sometimes the lost come back, and sometimes they bring you with them." She looked down. Diesel was watching the door again. By morning, the rain had lifted, leaving behind a low mist that draped over Cedar Falls like an old wool blanket, the kind that smelled like campfires and secrets. Sunlight pushed in thin blades through the Douglas firs, cutting across damp roads and dew-covered roofs. Main Street shimmered with puddles. The mountains beyond the town stood wrapped in cloud banks, watching. Inside the sheriff's department, the smell of fresh coffee mingled with damp dog fur. Sheriff Rachel Morgan stood by the window holding a chipped ceramic mug and staring out into the gray. Her patrol shirt clung to her shoulder blades. Bruised knuckles throbbed from the scuffle the night before. Behind her, curled up on a folded blanket next to the heater, was Diesel. He hadn't moved since 4 a.m., except to shift his weight off his bad leg. But he was watching, always watching. Rachel had lived most of her adult life with a badge and a gun. She'd run drills in burning buildings, tracked fugitives through storm-drained tunnels, pulled accident victims out of rivers. But nothing made her more nervous than the way Diesel scanned a room. Quiet, calculated, like he already knew the ending and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. Deputy Frank Alton arrived around 8:15 with a McDonald's bag and his usual grunt of acknowledgement. He handed Rachel an Egg McMuffin without asking and dropped into the chair across from her. "You sleep at all?" he asked. Rachel shook her head. Didn't feel right. He eyed Diesel. He didn't either. They ate in silence for a minute. Diesel flicked his ears at the rustling bee but didn't move. Then Frank slid a new folder across the desk. Another report, he said, this time from the trail cleanup crew up by Miller's Bluff. Same thing, rusted snares, barbed wire wrapped around 2 lodge poles like a noose. Rachel's jaw tensed. This is getting worse. Yeah, and bolder. These weren't hidden. They were just off the main footpath, like someone's getting careless. Or cocky. She flipped through the photos, tight metal loops poorly anchored, but dangerous enough to take down a deer or a kid on a bike. Frank took a sip of his coffee. We need to sweep the area. Quietly. No town-wide alerts yet. Don't want folks panicking before we know what we're dealing with. I'll go up this afternoon, Rachel said. I'll send backup. I don't need it. Frank looked at her over the rim of his cup. You taking him again? She didn't have to look at Diesel to answer. Yeah, he knows these woods better than most of us. Frank just nodded. Watch your 6. The road up to Miller's Bluff was narrow and winding, the shoulder crumbling from last winter's freeze. Rachel parked just before the old forestry gate, stepped out and stretched her legs. Diesel hopped down from the back of the cruiser, stiff but steady. The air smelled like a pine moss and faint engine oil. Birds called in the distance. Somewhere far off, a woodpecker worked a dying trunk. Rachel adjusted the strap on her field bag, checked her sidearm, and looked down at the dog. You ready? Diesel didn't wag his tail, just turned toward the trail and started walking. Half an hour in, they passed a collapsed hunter's blind and a dry creek bed. Rachel moved quietly, eyes scanning, ears tuned to every shift in the wind. Diesel stayed just ahead, nose low, steps careful. Then he stopped, ears up, head turned. Rachel followed his gaze. At first, she didn't see it. Then, barely visible through the underbrush, she spotted tire tracks. Thin ones, not from a patrol vehicle. They wound through a narrow clearing and disappeared behind a low ridge. No public access vehicles were allowed this deep into the preserve. Rachel crouched near the tracks, ran her fingers through the mud. Fresh, she muttered. Less than a day. Diesel sniffed the air, then looked up the ridge. They followed the tracks, weaving through tangled ferns and thorny brambles until they reached it. A pickup truck. Gray, battered, no license plates. A faded military-style tarp covered the bed weighed down with rocks. Rachel's breath caught. Something about it felt wrong. Not just illegal, ominous. She reached for her radio mic. Dispatch, this is... A sharp crack echoed behind her. Something struck her temple, hard, blunt, fast, blinding. She fell sideways, vision spinning. Her knees gave. The world tilted. Voices shouted. Hands grabbed her wrists. Rough, foreign. And then, darkness. When Rachel woke, the air smelled like sap and rust. Her arms were pinned behind her, tied to a tree. Blood crusted her eyebrow. A dull throb pulsed behind her right eye. The forest around her was quiet. Too quiet. She listened. Footsteps in the distance. Voices. Male. At least two. Not coming toward her. That was something. She flexed her fingers. The rope was tight. Military knots. Not local kids. She tried to remember the hit flash of movement, the sound of boots. Her sidearm was gone. Her radio, too. Her heartbeat pounded against the inside of her skull. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She whispered, "Diesel." Back in Cedar Falls, 9-year-old Mason Whitaker sat on the edge of his grandmother's porch, his legs swinging just above the muddy steps. Every afternoon, like clockwork, Diesel would appear at the tree line. He'd sit exactly 7 minutes. Mason would bring out toast crusts or sandwich bits. Then Diesel would vanish again like a ghost. But today, nothing. Mason squinted into the woods. "Diesel," he called. Nothing moved. His grandma, Clara Whitaker, stepped out with her shawl pulled tight and a prayer book clutched in one hand. "Don't go running off," she said, voice firm. "I think he's hurt," Mason replied. Clara looked at the sky, then at the trees. "No," she murmured. "I think someone else is." Miles away, Diesel stood at the edge of a shallow ravine, nose twitching. He had stopped walking hours ago. Hadn't followed Rachel's command to stay back in town. Not this time. He had known. Something was wrong. He picked up her scent beneath the pine needles layered with rust and sap and the sharp trace of blood. And he ran. Not fast, his body couldn't do that anymore, but with certainty. With purpose. Every limp was earned. Every step towards something. Back in the forest, Rachel's vision blurred. Her wrists throbbed raw. Her arms screamed from the pressure of the rope. She tilted her head up toward the canopy. Sunlight flickered through the branches. If she passed out again, she might not wake up. Then somewhere in the distance, she heard it. A single bark. Short. Sharp. Familiar. Her eyes welled. "Diesel," she whispered. Then louder. "I'm here." But it didn't matter. He'd already found her trail. He emerged from the brush like a shadow. Silent. Steady. She saw him through blurred vision, gray fur soaked in muddy amber eye gleaming in the light. His limp was worse. His breathing heavy. But he was here. He sniffed her hand, then circled behind the tree, inspecting the knots. Rachel tried to stay conscious. You found me." Diesel didn't bark, didn't whimper. He just started pulling, gnawing at the rope, teeth dulled by age but driven by something ancient and powerful. Faith. It wasn't fast. It wasn't pretty. But it was enough. Bit by bit, fiber by fiber, the rope gave way. Her arms fell forward, useless tingling, and she cried not from pain, but because she had never felt more seen. The rope finally gave way with a damp snap. Rachel slumped forward, arms limp, wrists burning. Every nerve in her body screamed, but she didn't cry out. She just reached behind her, fingers trembling, and found the coarse fur of Diesel's neck. "You did it," she whispered, eyes closed. "You really did it." Diesel didn't bark. He didn't move, not at first. He stood just behind her, close enough for her to lean into his body, stiff and warm breath, heavy like a ticking metronome. His job wasn't over, not yet. Rachel took slow, measured breaths. Her throat was dry, and the crusted blood on her temple had stiffened into an itchy line. Her hands throbbed as circulation returned. The forest around them hummed in late afternoon stillness, wind brushing pine needles, distant birds shifting nervously in the canopy. She gritted her teeth, pressed one hand against the tree trunk, and tried to stand. Her knees buckled. Diesel stepped closer, shoulder to her thigh, bracing her like a living cane. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't fast, but inch by inch she stood. Meanwhile, back in Cedar Falls, Deputy Frank Alton was pacing the floor of the ranger station, map in hand, boots muddy from hours spent scanning trailheads. His radio had been silent for too long. Too damn long. The sun had already begun to slide behind the mountain ridges, casting long shadows over the valley. A few tourists had trickled back into town after an early hike, but no sign of Rachel's cruiser. No updates, no radio call. Frank didn't like waiting, and he especially didn't like waiting when someone he respected was hours overdue in the backcountry. His phone buzzed. A note had been slipped under the front station door, written in thick pencil on lined notebook paper. A drawing, trees, a trail, a creek, a crudely marked X between two rocky ridgelines. At the bottom, Mason, I think he went here. Frank stared at the sketch. No scale, no names, but something about it tugged at his gut. Mason had a connection to that dog. Hell, the kid might have understood Diesel better than most adults. If Diesel was out there and Frank believed he was, then that X wasn't just a guess. Frank stuffed the paper in his jacket and called for backup. Back in the woods, Rachel and Diesel moved slowly along a narrow game trail. Her legs were unsteady, her left shoulder throbbed with each step, and her breaths came in sharp pulls. Diesel paced just ahead, ears turning, with every sound scanning the forest like a sentinel. They didn't speak, couldn't speak, but they moved as one. Twice, Rachel paused to catch her breath. Diesel waited without protest, standing at her side, his eyes fixed on the brush behind them. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full, laced with memory and something that felt dangerously close to faith. Deputy Frank arrived at the trailhead just as a Ranger SUV pulled in behind him. Out stepped Dana Ellis, Forest Service law enforcement, tall, wiry, late 30s, with a long scar that traced her cheekbone. "Nothing at Brush Creek," she said, handing Frank a damp notepad. "But I found fresh vehicle tracks by Miller's Bluff. Probably a pickup. Tires looked worn but heavy-duty, no plate impressions." Frank nodded, jaw tight. She wouldn't have gone there alone unless she was sure. Dana glanced at the hand-drawn map sticking out of Frank's pocket. "You trusting a kid's sketch now?" Frank looked east toward the trees. "Yeah, I am." Dana didn't argue. Rachel staggered into a small clearing bordered by birch trees and collapsed logs. She leaned against a trunk, gasping. Diesel stopped ahead of her and sniffed the air. He circled a patch of moss, then barked once. Sharp, clear. Rachel's head lifted. Voices, faint but real. A flashlight beam flickered through the trees. She tried to call out, but choked on dry air. She tried again. "Frank!" It came out ragged, barely more than a whisper. But Diesel turned and barked again, this time louder. And then came the crashing of boots through underbrush. "Rachel!" Frank's voice broke through the mist. She didn't answer, couldn't. She just let her body sink back into the tree and waited. Diesel didn't leave her side. They found her minutes later, half-slumped, bleeding, shivering, but alive. Diesel sat beside her, rigid alert, as Frank and Dana approached. "I've got her," Dana said, already unpacking a field med kit. "Pulse is weak, but she's aware." Frank knelt, brushing a leaf from Rachel's cheek. "Don't let him leave," she whispered. Frank nodded. He's not going anywhere. Back in town, word spread fast. It always did in places like Cedar Falls. No cell service deep in the forest, but gossip that moved quicker than wildfire. By the time Rachel was safely in a hospital bed, Diesel curled up on the floor beside her. The town already knew bits and pieces: the dog that saved her, the missing sheriff returned, the old scars reopened. And one question hung in the air like a low cloud. Where had that dog been all these years? Diesel stayed in the hospital overnight. No leash, no command. He lay under Rachel's bed, rising only when nurses came in, ears pricking, until he deemed them safe. Doctors said she'd be fine. Bruised ribs, dehydration, a mild concussion, rope burns that would scar. But she was alive, and she knew why. Later that week, Frank visited the small wildlife rehab center on the edge of town. He walked past empty enclosures and into the back room where Dr. Miriam Vaughn, petite, gray-streaked hair, eyes like soft velvet, was tending to a small creature wrapped in fleece. A bear cub, barely 6 months old. Its muzzle was scraped, one paw injured, but it was alive. "We found it chained behind a shack in the woods," Miriam explained. "Probably bait for a larger trap. Bastards didn't even bother to feed it." Frank nodded grimly. "Sheriff says we need to press charges on whoever set that up." Miriam stroked the cub's head. "He's too young to survive alone. We'll rehab him here. Try to release him near Glacier Creek by fall." At the sheriff's office, Rachel sat in her chair, arm in a sling, eyes sharp again. Diesel lay at her feet, head on paws. Frank walked in, handed her a folder. "Truck was impounded, no plates like we thought, engine shot, but we found tarp fibers stuck to Diesel's collar. Same as the one covering the pickup bed." Rachel looked down at the dog. "He led me back." Frank leaned on the desk. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Rachel nodded slowly. "We need to rebuild the K9 unit." Frank blinked. "We don't have the budget." I'm not asking for 10 dogs, just one, and I've already got him. A few days later, Rachel stood in front of Cedar Falls Elementary with Diesel by her side. He wore a navy blue bandana with a canine honor patch sewn into it. A group of fourth graders spilled out of the library doors wide-eyed. They gathered in a circle on the carpet, whispering, pointing. Rachel stepped forward with Diesel at her side. I want to tell you all a story, she said gently, about a dog who never stopped listening, who never forgot his job, and who brought someone home. When she finished, Little Mason pulled a white cloth off the easel beside him. A hand-drawn poster showed Diesel and Rachel under a pine tree sunset in the background. At the bottom, kindness echoes louder than fear. That night back at home, Rachel sat by the window with a journal open on her lap. Diesel lay curled nearby, one ear twitching in his sleep. She wrote, "Some things come back when you least expect them. Not because they were lost, but because they remembered their way home." She closed the journal and looked out at the trees. The forest would always have its shadows. But now, so did she. And his name was Diesel. The fog lifted early over Cedar Falls that morning, leaving behind a pale blue sky scraped clean by wind. Sunlight sliced through the trees like golden blades bouncing off dew-slick pine needles and glinting off gravel roads. It should have felt like peace. But Sheriff Rachel Morgan had learned to listen closer, and today the quiet didn't sit right. She stood at the back of the ranger station vest, strapped tight sidearm, holstered boots laced. Her arm was still bruised, her temple still tender, but the fog in her head had cleared. Beside her sat Diesel, alert and silent. He'd healed faster than she had, at least on the outside. The vet said his joints were stiff and his age was catching up, but none of it showed when he moved. He stuck to Rachel's side like a shadow, never needing a leash, never asking for anything. Just watching, waiting. They were both waiting now. The briefing started just after 6 a.m. in the parking lot with a makeshift whiteboard propped up between two SUVs. Deputy Frank Alton flipped open a folder and started running through the details while Rachel sipped weak coffee and scanned the tree line. Rachel's backup today came from county. Officer Rachel Nguyen, late 20s, sharp as a scalpel, ex-military CID investigator who didn't believe in small talk. EMT, Jared Lynn, tall and cool-headed with eyes like lake water. Monica Serrano, a local volunteer with sunburned cheeks, steel nerves, and years of search and rescue experience, tucked behind her quiet demeanor. They were good people. Capable, but none of them had walked through what Diesel had, and none of them had been there that day on the mountain in Colorado when everything fell apart. Only Diesel, only her. Rachel stepped it up to the map taped across the hood of the cruiser and pointed to a small ridge east of Brush Creek. "This is where the bear cub was found. Chained behind the shed," she said. "The truck we tracked from the trap site, it matched vehicle marks found near this ridge 2 nights ago. No plates, heavy tread, military-style tarp. And now, she tapped a red pin into a section near Moose Ridge. We've got a new sighting." "From who?" Officer Nguyen asked. Rachel answered without looking up. "Local hunter said he heard something screaming out there. Didn't stick around to investigate. Didn't want to become a missing persons case." Frank folded his arms. "No one sets up that many traps unless they're running something bigger than bushmeat." Monica nodded. "Animal trafficking, illegal sales, possibly out of state." Rachel looked down at Diesel, who lay at her feet, head tilted, listening. "He knows where they are," she said. "He found the cub. He found me. He can find them." Nguyen raised an eyebrow. "You're bringing a senior dog into a live operation." Frank chuckled. "He's not just a dog." They hiked in single file up the ridge, boots crunching through leaves. Radios clipped low for quiet communication. The sun rose slow and bright behind the tree line, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Diesel led the way, his nose to the ground, ears twitching. Rachel followed 2 steps behind, hand hovering near her hip. After nearly an hour, Diesel froze. Rachel knelt beside him. He sniffed a patch of dirt near a bend in the trail, then looked up at her and gave one soft bark. Rachel moved forward. That's when she saw it. A fresh trail of prints, not boot prints, but something lighter. 4-toed, sharp-clawed. And beside them, drag marks. Blood. They followed the tracks to a run-down tool shed half sunken into the hillside covered in brush. The door had been padlocked, but someone had forced it open recently. Inside, chained to a bolt in the wall, was a second cub. Smaller, shaking, its muzzle torn and its paw wrapped in a ragged scrap of denim. It whimpered when the light hit its eyes but didn't growl. Monica crouched, pulling her medkit from her pack. "It's alive." Rachel stepped back. "That's enough. We've got the evidence. We move in." They heard the truck before they saw it roaring to life deeper in the woods, engine backfiring. "East flank," Frank shouted. "They're running." Jared and Monica broke left through the brush. Rachel took off straight down the logging path, Diesel sprinting beside her. The woods blurred. Rachel ducked under low-hanging branches, her boots hammering the soft trail. Diesel pulled ahead, limping but fast, nose down and locked in. They reached a clearing just as the gray truck came skidding around the bend, fishtailing in loose dirt. Rachel dove to the side. Diesel didn't flinch. The truck slammed on its brakes, blocked by a makeshift barricade of downed trees. Two men jumped out. One had a crowbar. The other, a rusted hunting knife. Rachel raised her weapon. "Drop it, hands, where I can see them." They didn't move. Diesel stepped forward. The man with the crowbar hesitated. Diesel sniffed his boots, turned to Rachel, and growled. "That's him," she said. "Same mud, same oil, same scent as the shed." Nguyen and Monica arrived behind them, weapons drawn. The men finally dropped their weapons and hit the ground. Not because of the guns, because of the dog. Something about the way Diesel stood between them and the forest calm, scarred unblinking, made even criminals freeze. Back at the station, Dr. Miriam Vaughn took in the second cub, her gentle hand stroking its matted fur. "These babies, they don't know hate yet," she whispered. "All they want is warmth." Rachel watched from the hallway, arms crossed, her badge still clipped to her vest. Frank came up behind her with a mug of coffee. "We've got them both in holding. Vehicles impounded. We're contacting federal wildlife authorities now." Rachel nodded. "Good, let them answer for what they've done." She glanced down the hall. Diesel was curled under a chair, breathing slow, his nose resting on one paw. Frank followed her gaze. "He's done enough for 10 dogs. "I'm not done with him yet," Rachel said. "I want to restart the canine unit." Frank blinked. "You're serious?" "I want Diesel to help train the next generation." Frank grinned. "He's earned it." Later that week, Rachel stood in front of a packed auditorium at Cedar Falls Elementary. Diesel lay at her feet wearing his navy blue canine bandana. "I want to tell you all a story," she said, scanning the faces of curious kids and proud parents. "About a dog who never gave up. A dog who remembered what others forgot." She told them about the forest, the traps, the cub, the rescue. When she finished, Mason came up to the stage with a large poster. It showed a woman and DeBarring side by side under tall pine trees. Behind them, the sun set in warm orange strokes. Beneath it, in bold block letters, were the words, "The woods can be dark, but not if someone comes looking." Rachel smiled. She knelt beside Diesel and rested a hand behind his ear. The auditorium clapped. But Diesel, he didn't move. He didn't need to. He'd already done his job. The storm rolled in just after midnight. Not a loud one, no thunder cracking the sky open or lightning dancing on rooftops. It came soft and steady, the kind of rain that slips down pine needles and taps against glass like a lullaby. Cedar Falls slept through it, but Diesel didn't. He lay at the foot of Sheriff Rachel Morgan's bed, tail twitching, eyes open. Every few minutes he lifted his head to listen. Rain or not, his ears were always on. It had been a week since the bust at Moose Ridge, a week since the bear cubs were rescued, the poachers arrested, and Rachel was cleared to return to full duty. But something about the silence now felt heavier, like the woods were holding their breath. Rachel stirred in bed. She didn't sleep well anymore, not since the ambush. Her arm was healing. The bruises had faded, but her mind, that would take longer. At 3:12 a.m., she sat up, one hand brushing through her tangled hair. Diesel lifted his head immediately. "You heard that too," she whispered. A soft thud echoed from the front porch. Rachel swung her legs over the side of the bed, slid on her boots, and reached for her flashlight. Diesel followed her through the hallway, quiet as a shadow. When she opened the front door, the rain blew sideways across the porch. Empty, except for a piece of folded paper weighted with a pine cone. Rachel picked it up, wiped the water from the ink, and read the message. They weren't working alone. By morning, the rain had passed, leaving behind thick fog clinging to the lower trails. Rachel met Deputy Frank Alton outside the sheriff's office, the note sealed in a plastic evidence bag. "Dropped sometime after midnight," she said. "No footprints. Nothing on camera." Frank studied the handwriting. "Looks like the same pencil. Could be the kid again." Rachel nodded. "Mason." Frank frowned. He knows something else. Or someone does. They drove out to the Whitaker place just after breakfast. Claire answered the door in her usual housecoat and prayer beads, holding a steaming mug of peppermint tea. "I knew you'd come," she said without being asked. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Mason home. In the back room. But you should hear this first." Clara stepped aside, letting them into the kitchen. The walls smelled like cinnamon and old books. A quilt draped across the couch. A photo of Clara's late daughter hung above the mantel. He had a dream, Clara said, night before last. Woke up crying. Said Diesel was in trouble again. But when I asked more, he just went quiet. Drew something, slipped it under your door, didn't he? Rachel looked at Frank. He nodded slowly. I think he sees more than we do, Clara added. Always has. In Mason's room, Diesel sat beside the boy's bed, tail flicking. Once, Mason looked up at Rachel. They're still out there, he said. Not just the two guys you caught. Others. They have a cabin somewhere. I saw it. You saw it, Rachel asked. In my head. Frank shifted uncomfortably. Mason grabbed a crayon drawing from his nightstand and handed it to Rachel. The picture showed tall trees, a dark wooden structure, and a narrow bridge over a creek. At the bottom, he had written Diesel Knows. Rachel took the sketch seriously. Not because she believed in visions or sixth senses, but because Diesel had never led her wrong. And if Mason was right, someone had slipped through the cracks. Someone who was still hunting in her woods. They geared up that afternoon, Rachel, Frank, and Diesel. No full team, no county backup, just the three of them. They followed the path east of the ridge, past the old fire line, and beyond where the rescue teams had searched the week before. The terrain was rough, muddy slopes, collapsed trees, and moss-covered rock formations that turned footing into guesswork. But Diesel walked like he knew the way. And maybe he did. Rachel trusted his pace, trusted the way his ears shifted before she heard a sound, trusted the way he froze just before they reached a narrow wooden footbridge spanning a steep ravine. Frank crouched, studying the structure. That's been reinforced recently. Rachel pointed past it. There. Hidden behind a thicket of spruce trees, almost invisible from the trail, stood a cabin. Unmarked. No address. No power lines. Frank muttered bingo. They circled wide, coming up from the rear. Rachel and Diesel took point. Her sidearm was drawn. Diesel crouched low, eyes narrowed. There was smoke rising from a steel chimney. Someone was home. Rachel motioned toward a side window. She peered in. Inside, three men. One at a table, one cleaning a bolt-action rifle, one stirring something over a camp stove. And in the corner, a crate. Movement inside. Rachel's pulse quickened. They had more animals. She turned back to Frank. We call it in. No noise. No mistakes. He nodded. But before he could reach for the radio, a floorboard creaked inside the cabin. Diesel growled. Loud. And the man at the table turned toward the window. Go, Rachel yelled. The next minute was chaos, shouting boots, slamming the front door thrown open. One suspect bolted into the trees and Frank gave chase. The other two tried to barricade themselves inside. But Rachel was faster. She kicked the side door open and swept left. Sheriff's department hands where I can see. One man lunged toward her. Diesel intercepted, teeth bared. The suspect dropped the crowbar and stumbled back as Diesel cornered him with a snarl. The other surrendered. Frank returned 5 minutes later with the third man in cuffs. Rachel knelt by the crate in the corner and gently opened the latch. Inside, a fox kit no older than a few weeks shivered in fear. By sunset, the cabin was swarming with fish and wildlife officers, a state biologist, and 3 patrol vehicles. Rachel sat on the back bumper of her cruiser boots, muddy arms streaked with dried blood from a scraped knuckle. Diesel sat beside her, his tongue-out tail wagging just once. You're tired, she said softly, but not done yet. Frank approached with a fresh bottle of water. You good? Rachel took it. I am now. The next morning, Cedar Falls woke to front-page headlines. Senior K-9 uncovers second poacher camp. Photos of Diesel ran across every corner, store, diner, and bulletin board in the county. Kids drew posters. Local reporters requested interviews. A retired woodworker carved a wooden plaque with Diesel's name and pinned it to the sheriff's office porch. But Rachel knew something deeper had changed. Not just in the town, in her. That evening, she stood on her front porch, a cup of black coffee, in one hand, Diesel lying on the top step beside her. The sky blazed orange over the treetops. She didn't feel haunted anymore. Didn't feel like she owed the past her every breath. You brought me back, she whispered. Diesel didn't lift his head, just blinked slow. Rachel sat beside him, back against the wooden railing, knees pulled to her chest. And for the first time in 4 years, she didn't feel alone. Not even a little. The snow came early that year. By the second week of November, the ridge lines outside Cedar Falls had already turned white. Frost crept across rooftops. Kids bundled up in oversized jackets. Fireplaces roared in every house from Main Street to the outskirts of the old Sawmill Road. And at the edge of town, inside a timber-framed home surrounded by wind-swayed cedars, Sheriff Rachel Morgan stood at her kitchen window watching the flakes fall. Diesel lay behind her on a thick plaid blanket, his chin resting on one paw. His breathing was slower these days, more labored when he got up too fast. The vet had warned her arthritis, hip stiffness, old muscle injuries flaring in cold weather. But Diesel didn't complain. He never had. He still rose each morning before Rachel followed her from room to room and waited by the front door as if the day wasn't allowed to begin without him. He still faced every doorway, still slept light, still remembered. They'd been through a lot in the past few months. Ambush recovery, 2 rescue missions, a full investigation that ended with 3 men locked up on federal charges for illegal wildlife trafficking. But what surprised Rachel most wasn't the justice. It was the attention. Diesel had become something of a celebrity in town, not the Hollywood kind, the Cedar Falls kind. Hand-carved signs, thank you cards from school kids, a portrait painted by a local artist that now hung in the sheriff's office above Rachel's desk. They'd even given him a badge, real brass, polished, engraved with the words, Deputy K9, Diesel, Cedar Falls, WA. He wore it only once at the town hall ceremony where they honored him. Rachel hadn't planned to speak. But when she saw all those people, veterans, parents, teenagers, teachers, even hunters, who'd once side-eyed her new badge when she first arrived, she realized something important. They hadn't just come for her. They'd come for him. That night after the ceremony, Rachel sat on her porch with Diesel curled at her feet. The moon was high. Her badge was in her jacket pocket, the new one, the one she actually earned. She leaned down and scratched behind his ear. You changed everything you know. He didn't react, just pressed a little deeper into her boot. She smiled. I thought I came here to forget, but maybe I came here to remember. Thanksgiving arrived on the tail of a windstorm. The entire town lost power for a day and a half, but no one seemed to mind. The volunteer fire department served hot meals at the community center. People brought Oishwein blankets, folding chairs. Diesel stayed under Rachel's table the entire time, watching every passing plate with quiet curiosity. Mason sat beside him, holding his paw like they were best friends at a church service. The boy never said much, but the way he looked at Diesel said everything. After dessert, Rachel caught Clara Whitaker watching them from the far end of the room. The old woman raised her tea mug in a silent toast. Rachel nodded back. Winter deepened. Snow fell in thick sheets. The forest trails froze over. Poachers stopped coming. Things got quiet. Rachel used the downtime to build something she hadn't made space for in years. Routine. She and Diesel walked the perimeter trail each morning, whether it snowed or not. They stopped by the school every Wednesday to visit Mason's class. Once a week, they dropped supplies at the Wildlife Rehab Center, where both rescued bear cubs were now thriving in pre-release enclosures. Diesel never strayed far, never chased, never even barked. He just stayed close, everywhere they went. One Sunday morning, Rachel woke to find him standing at the front door, tail still, eyes fixed on the trees. She pulled on her coat and boots and followed him out without a word. They walked in silence, past the creek, past the bridge where she once collapsed, past the tree where he found her. Eventually, they stopped on a ridge overlooking Cedar Falls, the town quiet beneath a dusting of white. Diesel sat beside her, breathing slow, eyes half-lidded. She rested a hand on his back, and for a long time, neither of them moved. By Christmas, Rachel had fully restored the department's K9 unit on paper and in practice. Diesel couldn't do every patrol anymore, but he trained 2 younger dogs brought in from Tacoma. And what he lacked in stamina, he made up for in presence. When one of the new recruits, Ranger, a wiry black lab, got distracted during tracking drills, Diesel simply stood in front of him and stared until the pup focused. Rachel joked that he didn't train with treats. He trained with expectation, and it worked. On New Year's Eve, Rachel brought Diesel down to the lakefront bonfire. It was the first time in years she joined a public celebration without feeling like a stranger in her own skin. When the fireworks began, Diesel didn't flinch. Not once. He just leaned against her leg, ears relaxed, eyes watching the crowd. She looked down at him as red and gold bursts lit the sky above them. Guess we're both not running anymore, she said. The last Sunday in January, Rachel walked into the living room after a long day, unzipped her jacket, and set her keys on the table. Come on, old man, she called over her shoulder. Dinner's on. But Diesel didn't follow. He was lying in his bed near the fireplace, curled tight, eyes closed. She knelt beside him, put a hand on his chest. Still rising, still falling, but slower, more distant. She didn't call the vet, didn't cry. She just lay on the floor beside him, one arm draped across his shoulders, her breath syncing with his. And they stayed like that until the sun disappeared behind the trees. Diesel passed quietly the next morning just before dawn. No sound, no struggle, just stillness. Rachel buried him under the old pine near the trailhead, the same trail where he had waited for her, the same place he returned. The community came together to build a wooden bench beside the grave. Mason painted a rock with Diesel's name in blue. Clara left a sprig of lavender. Frank drove in from town to place the old K9 badge on the marker. And Rachel, she sat on that bench long after everyone had gone, said nothing, just listened to the trees. Weeks later, she wrote her final entry in the leather-bound journal she'd started after Diesel came back. The ink bled a little on the page, but her hand didn't shake. Some dogs are meant to stay, not just in our homes, but in our bones. Some return to save us. Others remind us we were never really lost. Diesel was both. Not every hero has a voice. Some just leave a trail strong enough to follow. She closed the book, set it gently on the shelf, and walked outside into the quiet morning. The woods whispered like they always had. But this time she wasn't afraid to hear them. Thank you for following the story of Diesel and Sheriff Rachel Morgan. If this story moved you, we want to hear from you. Have you ever known an animal who saved your life, physically or emotionally? Drop your story in the comments below. Your words might help someone else feel seen. And if you believe dogs like Diesel still walk among us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs a little reminder. Heroes come in all shapes. Some walk on four legs,